Church. Man, it is good to be here this morning. My name is Josh. As probably you could have recognized, I'm not Tim. And Tim is our senior minister. If you're visiting, Tim and his wife Lenore are out right now on a vacation, I think in the Northeast in Maine. And so since they're not here, I'm going to take this opportunity as a chance to actually brag on them a little bit. No, you were waiting for it. You thought I was going to tell some bad stories or something. No, I want to say something that I think most of you already know that are members here at Westside. But I wanted to start out this morning by saying how blessed this church is to have servant-hearted people like Tim and Lenore here at Westside. Tim has been, I work very closely with him, and I can tell you there is all kinds of things that man and his wife are doing in this community for this church, much of it behind the scenes, and he is a great example to me and to my wife, to my family. I know he is to many of you as well. So let's all be praying for Tim and Lenore this week that they're getting rested up. You know, when you do ministry full-time like Tim does, and when you're doing the things he does, it's good, as all of us need to get that refuel and that renewal time. And so hope you'll join me in praying for them and realizing, and when they get back, you know, say something nice to them. I know many of you already do that, but just tell them how much we appreciate them. So Tim has been walking us through this series this year focused on kingdom. So everything that we've been doing in 2019 is focused on kingdom. And right now we're in a series that focuses on kingdom families and what it looks like to be kingdom families. And today I'm going to be talking to you from the perspective of a parent that's looking to raise children that follow Jesus and lead their children and others to follow Jesus. This idea of discipleship that we talk about a lot at Westside, the third piece of our mission statement, which is love, share, and disciple. We're going to be talking this morning about what does it look like to be parents who lead their kids to follow Jesus. And I'm hoping when I say that, some of you that are sitting out that have already raised kids aren't going, oh, here we go again. I'll be talking about kids. We don't have kids anymore. I hope that you will hang around because I think God has a word in it for all of us today, not just people with children, but definitely that's kind of where we're focused on this morning as we talk about what it looks like to be kingdom families. So one of my great memories from my childhood was playing baseball with my dad out in the front yard. We grew up in the country. I grew up in a little town outside of the country down a rock road on about 5 acres, and we had a real big front yard. And so one of my favorite things to do every chance I could get was to get my dad to go outside with me and play baseball when he'd get home from work in the evenings, usually before dinner. And so, you know, the kitchen window, if you could see our house where I grew up, was right there looking out to the front yard. Oh, I'm already up there? Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. This is my first team. So when I'm out there playing baseball with my dad, you know, we would be doing all kinds of things, you know, throwing the ball, playing catch. He'd hit me pop-ups and ground balls, which he would call skinners. I never forget, you know, how much I appreciated that. Sometimes Mom would even come out and play first base for us, and we would run through these scenarios. So, you know, Dad would say, okay, Josh, there's a runner on first and third, and the guy on third is fast. So I'm going to hit this ball to you. Now, what do you do with it? And so he'd hit the ball with me and see if I made the right decision. And afterwards, he would correct me if I made the wrong, and he would encourage me if I made the right decision. So one of the things I found out really quickly was that my most important training was happening at home. So you see the pickup here. So this is sometime around third grade. Okay, so in third grade, I started playing for this team called the Colts, and that was actually my first experience on an organized team in baseball. Okay, I had been playing with my dad in the yard for years before I ever, in about the third grade, started playing what this was coach pitch. So I didn't do t-ball or any of that stuff. A lot of the kids on the team played t-ball, you know, they'd come up playing organized sports, but they didn't grow up with a dad or a sibling or a parent that played with them. They just kind of had sent them to play, you know, t-ball or whatever. And you know, t-ball, sometimes that just teaches you how to pick grass up in the outfield and stuff, right? And some of you parents have watched t-ball games before. But what I noticed was I picked it up really quickly because of all that training that I had gotten at home. And a lot of the kids that didn't get that training, it took them a little bit longer to figure out the ins and the outs of the game. And once again, it really did become clear to me that the most important part of my training really happened at home. And I doubt I'm alone in this. I think this is something probably you recognize in your lives as well. I mean, take a minute to think about what you learned from your parents growing up. And I want you to think about the impact that those things have made in your life. For me, it was baseball. I could tell you stories of other things. All of you have those things. You know, these can be positive or negative things. I know that for some of us in a crowd this size, that doesn't mean that necessarily everything we're thinking about right now are good memories or good things. Unfortunately, sometimes we grow up and our parents, some of us grow up in households where parents don't train well or even have some bad habits they pass on. Some of them pass on some bad habits along with some good habits, right? And so I realize that there could be a lot of different things that you're thinking about right now as you think about your upbringing. But others receive wonderful training for parents and probably still can notice the fruit of what you learn today in your lives. I mean, even, younger all the way up, and if you're in your 80s or over, you probably can still see the fruit of those things from your childhood that you learned today. And either way, I think whether it's positive or negative, the things that we learn from our parents is really formative. There's no denying that, is there? And here's a really important truth that I think we all need to recognize this morning. And that's that you're discipling your kids towards something. Every single person raising kids is discipling their kids towards something. And so how do we make sure that the most important thing that we're leading our children to is Jesus? That's the big question, isn't it? And one of my goals today is to give parents, to give us all some really practical things that we can use so that we can tackle this God-given challenge. The first thing I want to say is that discipleship starts at home. Discipleship starts at home. So we don't expect other people to physically raise our children, do we? I think most of us would say no. We expect to raise our children, to provide food for them, to put shelter over their head, all that good stuff, right? We don't expect that. So why should we expect other people to raise our children spiritually? And we all have, we have a lot of things at this church, at Westside. Let's just take Westside for example. There are all kinds of things that we have here at Westside that are wonderful things. Wonderful things. Bible classes. We have Monday Night for the Master. We have Celebrate Recovery. We have a youth group. We have a college ministry. Those are all great things, right? Amen? But I still don't think that those things are put in place so that we could be drop-off parents. You know what I mean by that? Just drop our kids off and hope that they get it from Mark or from one of our children's ministry teachers. Right? We'll just let them do it. They can teach my kid about Jesus. I think we could all agree that that's not the best way. Just like that wouldn't have been the best way for me if I joined that team and didn't have that training, that training starts at home. I think we could see that that's not necessarily the best way to do that, because if you think about it, all these people that are leading our classes in our children's ministry, they have families of their own that they're trying to disciple, right? And those families are spending a lot of time with, and so they have limited time. Mark, our youth minister here, has limited time with kids when they're around, right? And so he has his own family. And so I know Mark and I know all of these people that I'm talking about, people that are really giving a lot to do ministry here, to teach classes. All of them have a great heart for kids and have a great heart for our kids. But they can only do so much, and it's going to be so much better if what they're doing is coming alongside what's happening at home. Does that make sense to everybody? It's going to be a lot more effective if it's coming alongside things that you're doing with them at home. And so the first part of this, I think, is us fully accepting the responsibility and taking it very seriously. Fully, each of us as parents, to take it as our responsibility to disciple our kids at home and to make that just a very serious thing in our lives. And that's going to bless everything else. And the second thing that this practical things that we're walking through here that I think is helpful is to find someone who's already done it. Find someone who's already done it. I stand before you today as someone who has been richly blessed by having people in my life who have helped walk me through things and teach me things and have stood beside me when I didn't get it, who have helped me when I was really spiritually immature and taught me things and walked with me. So it's a big deal to me that all of us should be looking for godly men and women, godly parents that have been there before to mentor us and help us to understand, what we need to be doing. Just last week even, we were standing out, Lee and I think Keith and a few other of us, Ben, I think, were standing out at the playground just over here. And we were just sitting out there talking as dads, just a bunch of dads huddled up, right? And what we ended up talking about was just all these things about our kids and things that a lot of what we had done wrong, times when we had been too quick to spank them or we raised our voice to them, or that's a nice way of saying yelling. We raised our voice to them, right? And we had these stories, we were all going around the circle talking about those things, and Tim was there with us, and it was great to have someone that had already been there, right? Someone who had walked through that before and saying, hey, I messed up like that too, and I think his kids turned out pretty well. But these are the kinds of things I'm talking about, is just for us to look for people who have been there already. That's so important, guys. I think about when we lived in San Antonio. When we lived in San Antonio, we went to the Northside Church of Christ, and while we were there, there was a program they'd put together called Mentoring Moms. And Tiffany got to be in Mentoring Moms when she was pregnant with Lily. And so what it was this group of older women who very intentionally put together a program, a time of just spending time with people, and they had all kinds of things they would get together and do and teach and talk about raising kids, and they would meet on a scheduled basis, and then they stuck with them. Each one had a sponsor, so they would stick with them all the way through when they had kids, and we still hear from ours sometimes. I see her commenting on our Facebook group, but that's just another example about when we were living in San Antonio, we were like 5.5 hours away from my nearest family, but because of this mentoring presence that these ladies had in our lives, that was a great support to us when we were away from blood family, right? And so find someone who's already done it. There's really no reason, guys and ladies and brothers and sisters, there's no way that we should have an excuse to do this alone. Really, there's not. We should look around you. Just stop now and look around you. There's no reason that we should have to do this alone. We weren't designed to do it alone. So if you're doing it alone, or if you don't have some good parental mentors in your life, why not today think about someone that you respect, someone who's raised children, who's raised godly children, someone who's got wisdom to give, and connect with them and say, hey, I'd really like to get together with you and talk to you about that. How about if you're an empty nester right now, if you're someone that's raised kids and you have that wisdom to give, how approachable are you? How much are you offering that wisdom to people? So it works both ways, right? But how much of a blessing would it be if we really did find someone who's already been there before to help us out in this big challenge that God's given us all, right? The third thing, and this is where I'm going to spend the most time, is be intentional. I believe that this is I think it's a bigger struggle today to be intentional than it ever has been at any point, at any time in history, the history of the world, to be intentional right now. And here's why I believe that. I think we just really struggle to have to think about planning things today, right? I'll just give you a few examples of that. So one, think about just like entertainment, right, in the entertainment world. So I grew up, I was born in 1978. I grew up in the 80s. And when I grew up, in order to record a television show, you had to use what's called a VCR. And these VCRs, you would have to time them and hit buttons, and because you knew that Law and Order or whatever came on at 7 o'clock, so you got to fix it to where it would work, right? And it was painful to try to record something on television. You had to, just before VCRs, you couldn't record anything. So you would literally have to set up, if you wanted to watch your show, you would have to know that your show came on at 6 o'clock, and you would schedule everything around where you'd make that show, because if you missed it, good luck. It's going to be a while before you get to see that, right? And so that was what it was like for me growing up. And then you look today, all that's changed, right? We have DVR, You don't have to think about anything. I'm guessing right now there's probably an app on your phone you can get in, tell it to record some show for you, right? We have Netflix and streaming capability. You can binge watch shows, right? They come out and you can just watch the whole season, right? So we don't have to think about that stuff anymore. So just something as simple as like watching TV growing up, right? We had to be so much more intentional then. And that's kind of surface level. How about something a little less surface level? How about food? Food's kind of a big deal, right? So think about that. So how about like supermarkets and things like that? How about, when I was talking about, thinking about supermarkets, thinking about growing up eating food, it's only actually been the last 100 years or so that we've had supermarkets, grocery stores. And really not until like the 20s and 30s did that start getting a little more popular. So think about a time when you couldn't just run to the store and get something to eat. Believe it or not, for the greater history of the world, we have had to, find a way to get our food. We've had to hunt and gather, or we've had to do gardens, we've had to do all that kind of thing. It was really hard, right? But now it's not hard at all. You can just go to, your local supermarket. You can get anything you want, right? I mean, who didn't get an Instapot for Christmas last year, right? Everything is quick. I mean, we can microwave it, we can oven it, but there's just so many things that now we don't have to think about. We don't have to even consider anything. It's easy, it's quick, it's simple, but for most of our lives or before, we had to really give a lot of thought to what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. Comfort and distractions can become the enemies of intentionality. Think about that for a minute. Comfort and distractions can become the enemy of intentionality. So what do intentional discipleship-focused parents do in this world where it's so hard to be intentional because everything's so easy, everything's so streamlined, everything's so right at our fingertips? How do we be intentional parents when it's just not part of our culture, really? I've been thinking some this week, and I've been in Luke 8, and it's the parable of the sower. We're not going to read that parable today because I think a lot of you will know this parable, okay? It's one of my favorites. So there's this farmer, and he went out to sow seed, and as he was scattering the seed, some fell on a path, and it got trampled up and eaten by birds. And as you know, that the next thing that happened, Jesus is telling this story, and he says, the next seed, it fell on this rocky ground, and it never really had a chance to get those roots established, right? So that wasn't good. And then some, it fell amongst the thorns and got choked out by those plants and those weeds, those thorn. And then, of course, some fell on fertile soil, and that fertile soil yielded this great crop that came up, right? So you're familiar with that story. If you're not, I encourage you to go read that. So Jesus goes on to explain that to us that we're the ones who are out to be sowing the word, right? We're the ones spreading the seed around, telling people about Jesus. That's our role. The soil represents people's response to the word that we're sowing, okay? And so I've been spending a lot of time this week thinking specifically about this. There's so many things that you could take from that teaching, from that parable, but what I've been thinking a lot is about the soil. Because I wonder how many people are deaf to the gospel. They can't hear it, right? They're like that seed that fell along the path. I wonder how many of them grew up in homes without Christ-centered parents. And I wonder how many people who hear the gospel and they get excited for a minute, right? They get jazzed up about it. Oh, this is good. And then, boy, just something comes along and right away they're out of there like that seed that fell on the rocks. I wonder how many of them had parents who have stayed faithful their whole lives. And I wonder how many people who hear the word but choose riches and worldly pleasures and pursuits, right, overcome them, right? And that now is what they're focused on. That's their main thing that they're being discipled to. I wonder how many of them have had parents that have spent a lifetime modeling that Jesus is more important than anything else. I think about the soil. Soil needs to it needs to be cultivated to become good soil. Soil needs to be cultivated to become good soil. It needs to be tilled, it needs to be fertilized, it needs to have those weeds and those rocks taken out of it so that you can create an environment for something to grow in. And as parents, I think we have this beautiful opportunity to cultivate good soil in our homes. Our children's response to the word, right? Their response, it's going to be a decision that they make one day. It's going to be a decision they make. I can't make it for them. One day, all of our kids, each person has to choose this day who they will serve. But I sure do think that we're going to be in a better spot to see them grow up and choose Jesus first and become followers if we're about, to the best of our abilities, making that environment a rich soil that they can grow up in. And that's something we can do. That's something we can do. Good soil needs to be cultivated to become good soil. Now I want to get really practical now. So sometimes when we preach, when we teach, we say things and it sounds good and you get it, right? But we don't go to that next practical level to say, so what does it really mean to do this? Like, how do we really cultivate in my home, right? And so I'm going to get really practical here for a few minutes, okay? One of the things I think we're cultivating soil every time we do these things in our homes. One of those things is just to pray with and for our kids. To pray with and for our kids. So when we pray for our kids, I think it shows them that we really believe this stuff that we're talking about, right? And if we don't pray with or for our kids, that says something as well, right? So praying with them, praying for them, you can do that around a dinner table. You can do that before they go to bed. You can do that when you're in the car. There's all kinds of opportunities, and our children need to see this faith coming alive in us. And I think one of the ways we can cultivate that soil to make it rich, right, is to pray with our children. Another thing is just to read the Word with them, to read the Bible with them. I mean, there's all kinds of wonderful children's Bibles and different apps and all kinds of ways that you can kind of relay this message of Jesus to your kids. And so one of the things that I think we're cultivating the soil when we're sitting down and we're reading that Word with them and helping them process it. We can tell Jesus stories with them, right, and help them understand how we are to live as his follower. What's the great thing about reading those Gospels? And if you're going to read if you just have to choose one place to hang out, I think the whole Bible needs to be read. But I mean, one of the most important things is just Jesus, right? Those red letters, and looking at those stories and saying, how do they apply? I was out walking with our daughter Lily yesterday, actually, and we were walking around. Tiff and Katie were out of town yesterday, and so I had Lily, and so I convinced her to take a walk with me. And of course, I had this on my mind, and so you got to practice what you preach, right? So we're walking around our circle, and I see some little stones there, and I tried to kind of act like I was sowing seed and explaining that parable to her, right? And I can't tell you at 8 years old that Lily got that whole thing, but I think if we will continue to do those kinds of things consistently, one day I think it's going to click, right? So one way we can cultivate soil is just by telling Jesus stories to them, right? Because we believe those stories are real and have a great impact in our lives. We can be nice to people who are rude to us. How many times do we get our order messed up, at the restaurant, or someone cuts us off in the road or whatever, and of course we're human beings and we react as human beings react. I mean, what does it say when our kids see us being kind to people who aren't being kind to us? That sounds like Jesus stuff to me. That's cultivating soil, right? And when we mess up, because some of us are thinking, oh man, I yell at people that cut me off all the time, or I was rude to that waiter the other day or whatever. We come back and we tell them, hey, we messed up. That wasn't a very Jesus way to handle that, right? That's cultivating soil. Show compassion for hurting people, right? Jesus, we could just go read about Jesus. He was always showing compassion to the people who are the least of these, right? So what do we do to keep that soul rich in our households? We show our kids how to be compassionate, right? And then the last one I wrote down here, and you could think of your own, but I put fill our homes with joy and light instead of negativity and cynicism. It is really easy, guys, to get negative and cynical in the world that we live in. I get it. You can watch the news. It's all over the place. There's all kinds of doom and gloom out there. There's all kinds of horrible things happening, and we can focus on that, or we can act like people who are salt and light, and we can say good things and talk about good news to our kids. What does it say to our kids when they live in that same world and they see all that bad stuff going on, but mom and dad are focused on the good stuff, right? Once again, I think that's how we cultivate the soil. One day our kids are going to choose to follow Jesus, or they're going to choose to follow something else. That's pretty weighty. So Christian parents, we need to do everything we can to cultivate that soil that our children are growing up in. So I'm big on just kind of illustrations and just having some takeaway, right? And so what are we saying here? What's the primary goal of a discipling parent? If we can kind of put all this together, what's something we can take away? I heard a youth minister from Tennessee, a guy named David Skidmore, he used what I'm about to talk about as an example of this, and it's an illustration that is stuck in my mind. And so I'm going to now bring that to you today, and hopefully it will stick in your mind as well. I mean, I've grown up hearing thousands of sermons, and it's amazing how few of those stick with you and say something. This is one of the ones that did for me. I think it really speaks to what we're talking about this morning. So if you want to join me, I'm going to be in Luke 19. I'm going to be in Luke 19, 1 through 10, and I will read that aloud. It's the story of Zacchaeus. If there's any young people in here right now, they're probably singing the song, so you probably know the story, but I'm going to read it out loud here, starting in verse 1. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was wealthy. He wanted to see Jesus, who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran and he climbed up a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. And when Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came at once and welcomed him gladly. And all the people saw this and began to mutter, he's gone to be with the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I have cheated anyone out of anything, I will pay them back 4 times the amount. And Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. So there's so many ways we could look at this story of Zacchaeus. I mean, really, there's so many things we can do. One thing, if I got to preach again, that I'd like to preach on is the difference in the way this went down and the situation with the rich young ruler. A lot of similarities there. But here's something that really hits home to me, and something that I heard David say that will never leave me. And as I think about it, what was Zacchaeus' problem? What was his problem? He was short. His problem was he couldn't see Jesus, right? In his case, it was because of his stature, right? So he couldn't see Jesus. That was a big problem for him in this story. So what was the solution to the problem? The solution to the problem was a sycamore tree. The solution to Zacchaeus' problem was a sycamore tree, because the tree lifted him up so he could see Jesus. And what happened after Zacchaeus climbed up in that sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see, and he saw Jesus? What happened? He followed him. Zacchaeus couldn't see Jesus. He climbed up in that sycamore tree, he saw Jesus, and then he followed Jesus. Brothers and sisters, we need to be that sycamore tree for our children. We need to be the tree. It's funny that we were just talking about soil and good soil. What grows up from good soil? Trees is one thing that grows up. And we need to be that thing that lifts our kids up in a world where they can't see Jesus, guys. Because there's all kinds of things making them spiritually short, okay? They can't see over the mess in life. And so as parents, what we need to do is lift them up so they can see Jesus. And I pray, and I know all of us hope and pray that they'll follow him too, just like Zacchaeus did. We should always be lifting our kids up so they can see Jesus. But church, this isn't something just withheld. So if you've stuck around with me as we're wrapping up here, this isn't something just for parents, is it? I mean, what is it that I've said today that doesn't apply to all of us, right? Shouldn't all of us be about being sycamore trees? Shouldn't all of us be that thing that's trying to lift people up to see Jesus? I'm sure that's what Jake's doing and what Mark's doing. I'm sure that's what anybody trying to lead a ministry is doing, right? Because they're not in control of if that child chooses to follow or not. But one thing they can do is continually lift them up, be that tree that lifts them up so they can see Jesus, right? And then let God do the rest. And we can do that as a church. In any context, right? In any context that can happen, to where we are lifting children up, we're lifting people up, if that's through Celebrate Recovery, if that's through someone that comes in. Because one of the things that we know is that as much as I would hope that everybody is going to now be able to grow up in Christian families and get all that training and all that thing that we've been talking about today, but I think we know that we live in a dark world, and there are going to be a lot of people that come to us that no matter what we hope for or want, they didn't get that background. They don't have that. And so as we do that for our children, they become strong followers that they're now lifting their friends up. You see how this multiplication starts happening, right? But it starts with us at home. And if you've raised children, you can become a mentor. So kind of going back over some of the things, if you've raised children in here and you're amongst this audience listening to this today, then you could become a mentor for someone who's raising them now. There are people in this audience right now raising children, some that aren't here, that are part of the church here, that they're raising kids, and you can become a mentor to them if you've raised children and have some wisdom to pass on. How about if you're a grandparent? If you're in the room today and you're a grandparent, you can, hopefully you still have a relationship to where you can work with your children as they raise their children, and that you can have an influence on your grandchildren, right? So that's something that you can do. How about if you just don't have kids at all? Paul says that's an okay thing, right? Being single is just fine, right? So how about if you are here today and you don't have kids and you're probably not going to have kids, what can you do? Well, I think we need, personally, Josh thinks that we need more spiritual aunts and uncles and cousins at Westside. Because I don't know how your family operates, but I know the way God designed the family to operate was it's really kind of like that village approach that we talk about a lot, right? We all need to be in it together. And so if you're here today and you don't have kids and you think, what can I do? I think you got some stuff. I think you can do something. I think you can reach out, invite somebody over to dinner, do something to practically make a connection, build a relationship with someone, become a spiritual aunt or uncle or cousin to someone here or someone out in the community. So this hits home to all of us. Everybody can be a part of this. We can all be sycamore trees for someone who needs to be lifted up to see Jesus. And, it's my hope and prayer that each of us will take that seriously and do that, because that's really what changes the world. Parents who put a special emphasis on discipling their kids at home, who take that into every facet of what they do, and just to see that multiply and spread, that's what we're about. So if you're here today and maybe some of this has sparked up some hurt, something you feel you haven't been that kind of a parent that's a discipling parent, right? And this is hard for you. Or you're realizing some of your own childhood and how that's held you back in some different ways, and you're experiencing some hurt from that. If you want the prayers of the church and you just need to come around and have someone pray with you this morning, we'd love to do that. I just think, I think a lot about, we're teaching a class right now called Church on Mission, and I think about what is the role of the church. And I just think one of the most beautiful things that can happen is for a movement in our church to start up to where we get really, really intentional about this, to where, instead of just saying, I'm going to come over to your house and hang out, we say, hey, let's get together because we want to get together and pray for our families. We want to get together and pray for your children. We're going to get together and talk about some things I've been experiencing because I need some help. I think that's what the church is supposed to be. We're supposed to bear one another's burdens. And so today, if that's on your heart, that's on your mind, the church is here to help you with that. We'll have people around the room that would love to pray with you about that. If you're here today and you don't know Jesus, and you want to get to know him, you want to, matter of fact, know him so well that you're going to commit your life to him. You want to have your sins washed away and be forgiven and join this family, the family of Christ, then we would love to help you with that by assisting you in getting baptized. So if it's that or anything else, we would just really love it if you would come together today and do that as we stand and sing.
Just